Hello, thank you for the opportunity to present our provider enrollment application. So the first thing I'd like to do is give a high-level overview of how we approach collecting information, just the structure of the provider enrollment application, because that foundation is important as we get into more of the details of how the application does certain things and handles certain things. So as you can see on the left-hand menu here, there's a tree structure, and it starts with the billing provider, which some people call the pay-to, some people call the billing. So the root of everything is the billing provider. Now underneath that billing provider you can see that we have a bunch of nodes here in the tree. We collect some baseline information on the billing provider, address information, disclosure and ownership, and then we collect information on all the service locations, the rendering providers, the ordering referring providers, and then again at the pay-to level or billing provider level, the additional terms that have to be agreed to, the financial agreement for the whole EFT process, and then a lot of supporting documentation. And we break that supporting documentation up into three categories to make it a little more manageable for the billing provider. Service location documentation, the associated provider documentation, which would include both the rendering and the ordering referring, and then the pay-to or billing specific documentation. So that's kind of the structure of the application, if you will. And when the user gets into this application, they basically flow through this as a wizard the first time through, and they don't have to navigate, and they're not encouraged to navigate using this tree. The tree is more kind of to give them a perspective of where they are within the application, but they can simply use this next button along the way to just guide them through the different pieces and drive them down into the the tree. You can see I'm being driven down to the ownership, and I'll get into these screen details in just a bit. And they can back up and next and previous. But when providers come back in, sometimes they want to make targeted changes, so we've found that the tree navigation piece has an option. They can certainly jump around even the first time through, and also when they come back in later if they want to change something. So we found through interviews with providers and the provider outreach that both mechanisms are very useful. So one of the questions was, is the application the same for all providers? Is it dynamic based on data input, and is it customizable? So yes, it is the same framework, the same reusable framework for all providers. And what we do is based on rules and the data that the user enters, most specifically the provider types and specialties, that generally drives the vast majority of the data collection that this user interface does. And in a little bit, when I get to how to configure this application, we can get down to how that's actually accomplished. But one of the things I'm going to jump to here is down in a service location. So here I have two service locations, Calverton and Bethesda, and I'm going to get into Calverton. So a service location, the anatomy of a service location is basically addresses, what types, provider types and specialties can be seen at those particular service locations, what programs do they have there or participate in, any specific facility information, and then some detailed program information that's sort of custom to each state. But at the provider type and specialty level, what you see here is for this particular service location they have group providers, physician groups, and a physical therapy group. So when I click on the specific provider type specialty combination of group provider physician group, you can see that the questions here are specific to that group. So you can see when I click on a specific provider type and specialty, below is a set of questions. Now, all the questions that can possibly be asked by um, for any provider type and specialty are configured in the system. And then, based on rules related to which questions and data are applicable to a particular provider type and specialty, this screen dynamically changes and configures itself basically on the fly to just ask the appropriate questions based on rules and also based on data that's been entered. To give you an example, I'm just going to change this physician group to, say, speech therapy group, and you're going to see that the screen changed because there's a bunch of questions that are not applicable to speech therapy that may have been applicable to the physician group. And there are questions here that you see that are specific to the speech therapy group, like do you supply augmentative speech supplies, artificial larynx, which would not be asked if I were to change it to back to the physician group. And this happens on the fly. So this panel here that you see is a productized panel that is driven off questions dynamically based on both the rules attached to provider type and specialty and related like supporting questions. For example, if I have radiology services, then it's going to ask what type, right? So that's something that's more data driven than necessarily provider type and specialty driven. Provider type and specialty will get you to this question to begin with, but then once you're at that question, there's a series of related questions. So if I ask yes, answer yes there, I'm going to have to additionally answer the type of radiology, technical, professional, or both, and whatnot. So that gives you an example of how we dynamically drive the panels so that we can reuse and make everything very similar no matter what type of provider you are, and make the flow the same, so that regardless of who they're enrolling, there's similarity to the flow. It helps us better to train operational staff and call center folks, because it's not 38 different applications. It's all the same basic framework, but it adapts dynamically to the type of provider and only asks what they need. So the last part of that question was, is it customizable? So let me cancel out of this edit process here. And the answer to that is yes. So there are questions that we can add to the baseline questions, and program information is often an area where that's done. So I'm going to go to the program screen here, and you're going to see this has information on a particular program that the Physician Assurance Access System, Assured Access System, excuse me, or PAS, and this already has built in within our data model the ability to collect information on this. And the programs can be customized, they can be added in. Now, it doesn't require a new screen, because this screen is built, all these screens are built where we can extend the data model on them and add to the baseline to do state-specific or program-specific data collection. And that can be tied right into our dynamic rule-based configuration specific to provider types and specialties. It can be driven based on other data like zip codes, so if there's some kind of geographic area in which a program is relevant, we can do that. So it can be customized. Now, I do want to underscore that although we're using the word customized there, we're really extending the already tested and fully functional and feature-rich baseline application. So it's not a huge undertaking. It's not a whole big thing to go and customize screens. Most of it is just configuring new questions, configuring what the flow is, and loading that configuration in. There may be times when we have to customize, maybe create a custom panel, but that panel is going to extend a baseline panel, and it's going to follow all the pre-tested infrastructure and navigation. So it's very straightforward to add in a custom panel. In addition, the flow of these screens can be restructured to go in a different order. It's just an ordering, sequence ordering, and we have varied that between state to state as well. So the next question is data saved between for later completion? So if somebody hasn't finished and they want to come back later, can they get out? And the answer to that is yes. So as you see down here, there's a save and close button that they can save and close the state where they're at. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then it tells you your application's been saved, here's your case number, here's the information you need to remember to get back in, and then you can go ahead and return to the home page. Now I'm just going to reload this page, and that's going to bring up the application again, and I'm going to have to get back in. So this is what the resume capability looks like. I have to put in my email address, and this can be customized to the security requirements for whatever portal we're either residing in, or if we're residing in our own portal. You know, it can be integrated with the trading partner management, whatever access management is required. We can integrate with that. So I put in my email address, my case number, federal employment number, and then I click on Resume Enrollment. Now what you notice is we jump right back to that program screen because that's where we left off. So it brings the provider back, or the you know, the whoever's doing this, the administrator, maybe the office person, right back to the screen where they left off. So that's pretty convenient as well. Now a related question to can they come back for later completion is are reminders for incomplete applications automatically generated and or otherwise addressed? And the answer is yes. So there's a configuration in our system that we can put thresholds in place and reminder configuration, so that if something is so we can detect abandoned applications or applications that have been sitting for a while. And that timeline is fully configurable. If you want it to be 10 days, 30 days, 90 days, we can do that, and it's just a configuration setting as well as the reminder emails. And for example, in one particular state, they wanted a 90-day abandoned application mechanism in place, and what we do is after 30 days we go ahead and send them a reminder email saying, hey, this is going to be deleted, purged from our system in 60 days. And then another 30 days goes by and we say, okay, send another email, it's going to be purged in 30 days. And then when it does finally hit 90 days, we'll go ahead and send that other email saying, hey, tomorrow it's going to be purged from our system. And if they get back in, it resets the clock. And if they don't, then we have a special job that runs at in the evenings and clears out any abandoned applications. So another question was, what is done to prevent replication in data entry or user input mistakes? So there's a number of things that we do, and they range from pre-population from known data sources to maybe lookup validation or lookup automated entry of data, and we also have convenience type of data entry where we'll pre-populate or reuse data that's been entered in another part of the application, so we don't have to re-enter. And I'll give an example of each of those. First of all, when we first get into an application, we reach out to NPES and pre-populate some subset of information, some address, the NPI obviously that we verify. We can also reach out to CAQH, their UPD, if the particular provider has entered information into the UPD. We can reach out into any repositories that the state may have access to. For example, oftentimes when we come in, we're coming in and there's already an existing provider enrollment database of some kind, and we will pre-populate the information from that repository. So there's a number of things that we can pre-populate based on, and depending on how trusted the source is, we can either allow the provider to change it, require them to change it, or just whatever makes sense. In addition, there's the lookup capability. So I'm going to just take a simple example on the zip code here. So here, for a particular address, when you type in the zip code, we automatically look up what that zip code is and pre-populate based on that zip code, city, county, state, and country. You'll notice that this has a drop-down associated with it, and the reason for that is there's certain places in the country where a particular zip code is actually referred to as two different city names. There's a couple here in Maryland, and for that reason we have made this a drop-down. So if two city names come up, we'll put them both in the drop-down, and the user can pick the applicable one. In terms of convenience and not re-entering data, let me just clear this data out for a second so you get an idea of that. So here we have physical address, mailing address, and W-9 information. So in a large provider, all these three pieces of information can be very different. In a small provider, it's not. So so they don't have to re-enter the same address. They can just say set mailing address same as pay-to physical, and that does that. And there's a number of those throughout the application. So the next question I'm going to address is a question that asks, can supporting documents be loaded and attached to the application? And that's yes. So after the provider goes through and enters all their information on all these pieces here, all the billing piece, the address, the disclosure information, service locations, rendering, ordering, additional terms, which is our attestations. They may have to read documentation and attest that they have read and agree to the terms of those, and that's all configurable in terms of what those attestations are. And they're driven by state policy, as well as some of these attestations are specific because there's certain provider types and specialties on this application. So the documentation is all driven by state policy, and then even at a more refined level based on the provider types and specialties as well. And sometimes that can be a pretty big chunk of documentation. So we break that up into to help it be a little manageable here, to service location documentation, associated provider documentation, which would include both the renderings and the ordering referrings, and the pay-to or the billing documentation. So I'm going to jump to the service location. So based on the service locations that we've entered in and the types of services provided, there's a couple pieces of documentation that are required based on the configuration that we have that I'm showing you in this demonstration. It may very well be in your particular state there's more requirements, but this is all something configured, and I'll get to that configuration capability in a second. But here you see that we need a CLIA certification, and the requirements stated that you can either upload or mail these in. So we want you to tell us which is going to be. If you're going to upload it, then you can upload it, and once it's been uploaded, you can actually view what you uploaded. So if you come back in here working later, you'll be like, well, what exactly? I can't remember what I uploaded. I uploaded right then. You can view it, and we'll show it to you. Or you can go ahead and upload it. And upload is, the same thing. You can just upload a scanned image or whatever it is on your hard drive, PDF, and go ahead and send it to us. Same thing applies to the associated providers. This one is generally one of the bigger lists of documents, and they're organized based on the NPI of the particular rendering or service ordering referring, so you know who it pertains to. And again here, same thing, the method of submission. There's also the system supports the ability to fax it in as well. In this particular state that I'm showing you the configuration for, they didn't have that in there. And we can also, there's this download piece, we can also download a pre-populated form. So, and that's more relevant with, say, maybe the W-9. As you can see here, the provider agreement. So we have a standard, provider agreement that you may have, and we'll pre-populate that with the relevant information from this application. EFT form, if they've entered their financial agreement information, that can also be downloaded and pre-populated in the form. And it doesn't, so this particular configuration has a lot of things that need to be either uploaded or downloaded because they need wet signature. If the policies are such in your state where they don't need wet signature, then it's really just a matter of downloading to review and then clicking on an electronic sign button here that goes along with the signatory collection data here. And but that, the types of electronic signature policies do vary from state to state. So this screen is a baseline screen with infrastructure for the documentation, and that's all configurable. And then it's just plugging in whatever specific electronic signature policies may be applicable to your state. All right, another question was about ownership and controlling interest. So that's we have that in the disclosure and information section of the application. And again, this can be driven however your state feels they would like to see it. It's done in the 3 states that we've done it in. It has stayed the same way. So you have first disclosure statement. Does any person own more than 5% of this entity, the billing provider? And if so, then they have to go and provide details. If not, then they have to, if they say no, then at the end of the day, when they do their document submission, they have to sign a document that says, hey, nobody, there are no owners that own more than 5%. But let's follow the path of when there is an owner or more owners that own 5%. So here you can enter in individuals and details about those individuals. Here are, in this pre-populated application here, there's 2. And you can go ahead and enter more if you'd like. And then once you've done that, I'm going to proceed to the next screen here. You're going to see ownership relationship. So for all the owners that have been defined, you need to establish what the relationship is, if they're married or related in some fashion. Choose the owner, choose the relationship, and the other owner, and go ahead and add the relationships. You can see there's already one defined. That's the only one that's relevant for this particular application. And then other ownership or controlling interest. And by the way, this all follows a format that ultimately, the reason it's structured as it is when it was done, there was a CMS form that needed to be populated at the end of this. And so this is all information that's it's organized so that we can populate that CMS form at the end. And then there's other controlling interests. If they have interest in any other organization, any board member or owner of this organization has ownership or controlling interest in any other organization that bills Medicaid, they have to enumerate that here. Then there's a slew of legal questions related to the owners that need to be understood. And here, for specific owners, there's disclosure statements about criminal convictions and whatnot, anything, any issues or contracts with subcontractors totaling more than 25 grand during the previous 12 months, things of that nature. So that's so I just wanted to touch base on the ownership piece, which takes up four panels here. So it's an important piece of the process. And I think the last thing I wanted to mention about the UI and how it works in particular is that this same user interface can be used for not only new applications but also maintenance of applications. So maintenance of applications, basically we pre-populate from the current data, the current enrollment information that's on file, just like we would if it was doing a re-enrollment when we first come in, when it's old data maybe and want to maybe re-enroll everybody or revalidate folks. We can pre-populate, have them walk through and reattest. For maintenance, they want to come in and change their address. They can jump in here, change their address, and we track what's changed and pass that down to the downstream processing, so the downstream processing knows that only certain things have changed. And the app also has the capability to actually constrain what can be changed, and that's basically through mechanisms in the data model when we get it back from the back end, or we can configure certain types of maintenance. For example, there could be demographic maintenance where they just come in, change some address information that's not going to require any downstream credentialing changes or whatnot, so we can focus the screen on just those types of things and lock everything else out. But a lot of that's configuration oriented, and that's something that if we were to do this in your particular state, we would sit down with you and look at how you want to approach things. So the next thing I want to talk about is how do we configure this system. There's a boatload of rules, and you know, there's a lot to it. And so what we've come up with is basically a matrix that's a spreadsheet. And this top column here has all the configurable information, or the pieces of information we need that drive the data collection process. And so, you know, there's a lot of pieces of information, a lot of basically rules that we need. And the way we do this is each row here is a unique provider type and specialty combination. And then for each of those unique provider type and specialty combinations, in this particular state there's about 180. For each of those, there'd be a row for each unique, and then answers to those questions, all these questions. And once we have answers to all those questions, and that's something we'd sit down with your, your business folks and just to figure out what the answers to these questions are. There may be custom pieces that need to be collected, documentation. So this has documentation, questions are all across the top, all the questions in the app, all the documentation in the app, all driven by this. So it's very flexible. And so when that is finally approved, what we do is we go ahead and convert that into an XML rule set that is interpreted by our application. And so each of those rows that you see for a particular provider type and specialty in the spreadsheet result in a particular node inside of this XML configuration file, which I'm highlighting here, one particular node. So I'm going to open up that node. You can see this is for group provider physician group. It has information on the licensing, information on the specialties, the questions that are asked, different snippets that are shown, attestations, and the documentation requirements. So all that is there, and then on an ongoing basis, when things change, it's just a matter of augmenting the rules and repushing this configuration. So that just about concludes what I wanted to show you. You know, back to, I just want to underscore that the way we approach things here is the billing provider is the root of the application, and then within that same enrollment application we need information on the service locations, the renderings, and the orderings. Now this can be configured to not have all that nesting, and if you wanted from a policy perspective to enforce you know, the only collecting the billing provider information from the billing provider, enforcing the service and setting up service locations, and then forcing the renderings and the ordering referrings to come in independently and update the information, then those folks would pretty much just you know, see similar things at the root level, but they would be putting in, we'd know their rendering provider, and we would have these screens being shown up front and could organize it as such. But then that requires some more back-end processing to link things together. Where this approach, we're doing that all up front, and the provider's verifying that up front. So the billing provider has more control, but we can do it either way. So that's all I had. Thank you very much for taking the time to allow us to show you this. Have a good day.